Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony ZV-E10 on the left and the ZV-1 on the right. So let's start off with pricing and specifications. Both of these cameras are designed and marketed by Sony to be ideal for vloggers, content creators, YouTubers, streamers, and I think they are. They're affordable and they get the job done, which is probably the most important thing. Now, in terms of pricing, the ZV-E10 is $700 body alone, $800 if you decide to get a kit with the 16 to 50 mil power pancake zoom lens. The ZV-1, on the other hand, is right now $650 US. So they're very close on pricing. Their feature sets are nearly identical. Of course, there's a little bit more or a lot more depending on how you plan to use the camera in terms of capability and flexibility with the interchangeable lens ZV-E10 because it has a larger sensor that is a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. It also has more autofocus prowess, in my opinion. Both have real-time tracking, 11 frames per second on the still side, no electronic EVF, but the ZV-1 doesn't have one either, because again, these are designed to be video-centric, and they are. Now, when it comes to the sensor size, the ZV-1 does have a smaller 1-inch sensor rated at 20 megapixels. It also has a fixed lens that has an ND filter built in. And some of you might be saying, how can you even compare a fixed lens point-and-shoot camera to an interchangeable lens camera? And really, it's quite easy. I think what it boils down to is that if you don't plan on adding quality glass to the ZV-E10, and if you don't really want to learn how to use the camera, but you prefer to just leave it in auto and have that convenience, the ZV-1 is for you, because that's exactly what it pulls off with this fairly fast piece of glass, the 24 to 70 that is fixed on here. Also, the fact that it has that integrated ND filter is going to be a blessing for you. Essentially, an RX100 Mark V VA is what you're getting here, which is a steal at its price point. So as long as the limitations of the lens and the fact that it can't get incredibly wide at its widest point, which is 24 millimeters, doesn't bother you, this is the way to go. You'll use it more often, you'll get great results. In the same vein, if you try to do that with the APS-C based ZV-E10 with something like the Pancake Kit zoom lens, your results, at least in my experience, aren't going to be as good as what you'd get out of the ZV-1, in spite of the larger sensor, in spite of the better battery life, in spite of the fact that it's less prone to overheat. All of those things are great, but again, if you aren't going to really learn to use the ZV-E10, stick with the ZV-1. Now, if you want to know how the ZV-E10 can outperform it, I mean, I've already mentioned some ways. Because it has that larger battery as opposed to the ZV-1, you're looking at basically double the battery life, which is pretty impressive. So that should be on your to-do list if that's relevant to you. Both battery bays are also where you're going to be inserting your SD card. And essentially you can, if you use an external battery pack, you can shoot with these until you fill up your SD card. Now, when it comes to the I/O that both of these cameras have, that's another relevant thing. The ZV-1 is smaller and obviously not designed to really accommodate everyone. So all you're getting with the ZV-1, which is not bad, is a mic jack. And these are all things you will want to have. You're also getting a Sony multi-port, which is good for accessories as well as transferring, although I always take an SD card out. It's also how you could essentially do streaming with this. Both support 720p using Sony software, and of course HDMI out. Now, controls are fairly straightforward. Ergonomics are not amazing on the ZV-1, but they're better than most of the RX100 line, which doesn't even have a grip. So, not the best ergonomics, but certainly doable in my opinion. One of the nicest things about both of these cameras is that flippy display, fully articulating screen with limited touchscreen capability, at least in the selfie mode, and also the ability to mark, a subject for tracking. Those are all great things. Both cameras have the defocus button in the same position, essentially, excuse the focus there, and that's going to just defocus the background of your subject. So if you're looking to make that happen with a single button, you have it. The other nice thing about both of these is the product showcase mode, which is easy to enable inside the menu system, and that does exactly what it sounds like. It gives you the ability to be on camera, present some form of product or subject to your audience, and the camera will autofocus immediately to that item, and then as soon as you take it out of the frame, come right back to you, which I think is a great feature. I think it's far more impressive than the defocus button, but if you're never going to do anything manually, I mean, that's who Sony is trying to get with both of those features. It's just what they're able to pull off with the product showcase is more of an impressive feat when it comes to the autofocus system being directed to pull off essentially a trick. Now, with both of these cameras, you may have noticed they have a microphone grill up here, and they both have tri-capsule mics that are better than what you'd find on most cameras. Do I think that means you won't need an external microphone? No. If you really plan to do any form of formal content creation, you will want a shotgun mic or a lav system. Both of these support Sony's new digital lav system. I unfortunately don't have that. I wish it supported their pure digital shotgun mic. This is a great microphone that unfortunately has been snubbed on these. If you know something I don't, feel free to chime in. But audio is definitely better than most cameras, but not amazing. That's where I would leave it. Both cameras come with a dead cat that you easily can install right in the hot shoe mounting point, so that's really easy. That'll cut all wind noise essentially when filming outdoors. Another thing you probably will want to pick up for either of these is the Bluetooth grip. Highly recommend it. It's great not just as a grip with full control essentially, at least over basic things like still video recording, the C1, which in this case is already set to the defocus on both cameras, and then of course the ability to toggle zoom in and out, and then it will convert to a little tripod as well. It's about $100, and I think it's a must-have for either of these. But when it comes to filming video on either of these cameras, something important to know. The ZV-E10, as I've mentioned, has a lot of advantages, including profiles for color grading, which is really nice, HLG, S-Log, but we do have some issues with jello effect because of the rolling shutter on this camera. Now, if you're not familiar with that, essentially, if you pan while recording video quickly and following moving subjects, that often happens, the video quality is going to go to crap. It's going to essentially wobble and get distorted. You're going to get a lot less of that on the ZV-1 because of the smaller sensor and the built-in lens, that fixed lens. It's just not as picky when it comes to the rolling shutter issue. Because we have a larger sensor here, and of course no IBIS, that is in-body image stabilization, this is far more prone to that problem occurring. So it's just something to be aware of. I don't think it's a game breaker for this camera because at this price point, I think this is really an excellent buy. When you think about the fact that it has real-time tracking while shooting 4K and no crop at all shooting 4K video at 24p, a little bit at 30p, and it's capable of doing 1080 at 120 frames per second, which is effectively the S&Q, the slow motion that this provides. It is just a really well-rounded piece of hardware. You still have eye autofocus, so it will lock onto your subject's eye. It also now got a firmware update to be able to lock onto eye autofocus for pets, for animals, which is a really nice feature. And when you think about the sensor that you're getting and the overall feature set, granted we have no IBIS or EVF, this is essentially what you get with the Sony a6600, which is twice the price of this camera. So, in terms of a full picture of value, it's better in just about every way. More shallow depth of field because of that larger sensor than the ZV-1. But, how important that's going to be to you really is answered by whether or not you want to learn to use this camera. If you don't have an interest to really grow with it, then the ZV-E10 isn't the way to go. That's what the ZV-1 is there for. So while you might think they cannibalize each other, they don't. Both of these, of course, will outperform your iPhone or whatever phone of choice you have, as long as it's a flagship. They are incredibly competent these days. But the ZV-E10, of course, can take you to a whole nother level if you actually invest time in it. And the I/O also speaks to that, because not only do you have a mic jack like we have on the ZV-1, but you also have a Type-C port, HDMI out, and a headphone jack for monitoring. The only flaw with that here is that when you're using the display, as you can already see, it does get in the way. Now, if you already have this flipped out, you can work with it, but it's going to block the screen a little bit. So not a great design choice by Sony. That's something they'll, I think, probably rectify down the road. But for what it is right now, that's what we have to deal with. So both are very similar in size, similar in price. I think it really boils down to, as I've stated, how much you're willing to invest both in terms of time and money after the purchase. If you don't want to do much of that, the ZV-1 is for you. If you're ready to get your feet wet, go with the ZV-E10. And that pretty much wraps it up. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post it. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe, and please stay safe. Later.